Meeting is sort of the last-ditch attempt to restart the Oslo Accords. After that, we really never have an effective one. In fact, the Palestinians start what we now call the Second Intifada in late 2000, which is a 5-year ongoing terrorist attack on the heart of Israel. It was suicide bombers blowing up on buses, in cafes, in malls across Israel. That is a reality I grew up to as a teenager. The Palestinians did everything they could to sabotage the peace accords. And on the Israeli side, our population strongly lost faith that there's a chance to really reach meaningful peace with the Palestinians. Many years down the line, we find out that Arafat's Second Intifada, that was marketed as this grassroots movement, wasn't as spontaneous as it was pegged to be. In fact, it was meticulously planned by the PLO, by the Palestinian Authority, to sabotage the peace with Israel. So how is all of this related to the Gaza Strip and today's topic? Let's go back to the Gaza Strip. So from the 90s through the early 2000s, Gaza has a mix of Palestinian cities, which are the vast majority of the population, and Israeli communities that are spread out on the coast, on the eastern side, and in the north of the Gaza Strip. In the absence of peace negotiations with the Palestinians, and in response to the ongoing threat of terrorism, in 2005, the Israeli government, led by Ariel Sharon, does something that no one has ever done in history. We decided to pull out of the Gaza Strip with no agreement, with no preconditions, with nothing, just with a point to stop the violence, to stop the terrorism. Every Israeli citizen and soldier are pulled out of the Gaza Strip till the last one. It's important to know that this was not easy for the Israeli people. In fact, till this day, the 2005 disengagement from the Gaza Strip is considered to be one of the most divisive events in Israeli history. Till this day, people talk back to that event as one of the causes for our current political conflict. No more Israelis inside the Strip, no Israeli military presence. The Israeli-Gaza border crossings were to be used only for the passage of goods, aid, and individuals with permits from within Gaza into Israel or goods into Gaza. Control of the Gaza-Egypt border was handed over to Egypt. And the expectation was that this move on our end would allow the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to finally have the peace, to have the freedom that they wanted, to have the control of their own land, and to finally move away from violence. So Israel withdraws from the Gaza Strip in 2005, leaves behind the Palestinians, who a year later, 2006, have national elections. The Hamas wins. They don't win all the votes, but they win enough to overthrow the Fatah, the PLO, and they don't do this in the democratic way. They violently and murderously throw them out of the Gaza Strip. There have been no other elections since in Gaza. So the Gaza Strip was now under Hamas control, which openly called and still calls for the destruction of the entire state of Israel. We continue to give them water. We continue to give them electricity. We continue to have tens of thousands of Palestinians work inside of Israel, and the violence continues from the Gaza Strip again and again and again. The Israeli-Gaza border has been the crossing point of numerous terrorist attacks, abusing Israel's permits, coming into the country to kill soldiers and civilians alike. And the communities along the Israeli side of the border have become so accustomed to the rocket attacks from the Gazan side that everywhere you look, you'll see bomb shelters. With a hostile entity along its border, Israel resorted to tightening the border points between Israel and Gaza, saying, if you want open passage, at least recognize our country's right to exist. Since 2006, that has not yet happened. I think if there was anyone who had any doubts about how much of a necessity having a strong border with the Gaza Strip is, those doubts disappeared on October 7th with a vicious attack of the Hamas against the innocent civilians of Israel. There's this claim that's constantly made that Israel is the one that controls all the entry and exit of the Gaza Strip, but that's of course not true. Israel controls the eastern side and the northern side bordering with Israel, but they have a whole big border that borders with the Egyptians. And that border is controlled by the Egyptians since 2005. So who benefits the misleading statement that Gaza is a prison controlled by Israel? There are ulterior motives at play here. Hamas are a terrorist group that is part of Iran's network. It's Iran fighting through Hamas, attacking Israel. The biggest victims of the Hamas actions and the Iranian government behind them are the Palestinian people living in the Gaza Strip. If you've seen any of the footage coming out of the Gaza Strip lately, it's impossible not to feel empathy and compassion for the people of that strip. The Hamas took the water pipes that were donated and they used it for rockets. They took the fertilizer meant for building the land and used it for explosives. They took the construction materials continuously brought in to build tunnels to attack Israel, because the Hamas policy has been destructive and devastating to the people of the Gaza Strip. That is the reality of what's happening on the ground. So where does this all leave us? What do we do with all this information? We have to understand how important it is to have a strong border between Israel and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The people of Gaza deserve a peaceful life. They deserve prosperity. They deserve quiet, as do the people of Israel. And with Hamas in control of the Gaza Strip, that's simply never going to happen. If Gaza is a prison, then Hamas are the prison guards.
The Israelis are walking a line on this. The stated goal of the operation is to end Iran's nuclear weapons program and to end the nuclear threat against Israel. But to achieve this, the Israelis are threatening, kind of implicitly, sometimes a little bit explicitly, to decapitate the whole regime. When I said before there was a decapitation strategy, it's been a military decapitation strategy, but they are signaling that they would be willing to go further. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu is urging the Iranian people to rise up. Tonight, they struck an oil depot in Tehran. That was a shot across the bow, saying we could go after your oil refineries and take down your entire revenue producing and part of your economy. They don't want to do that because they're afraid. First of all, I think the Americans have probably suggested to them or strongly urged them not to do that. That's been the American position before in the Biden administration. It wouldn't surprise me if it was also the Trump administration's policy. But they also fear that the Iranians will retaliate, not just by taking out energy infrastructure in Israel, but hitting the Saudi and the UAE infrastructure, closing the Straits of Tehran, widening the front in order to pull the Americans in to shut down the war.
Well, what do you think the likelihood is that the U.S. will get involved?
The latest reports out of Israel tonight are that the Americans are talking about possibly getting involved on the side of Israel to actually take out the Fordo site. This is the most deeply dug-in, fortified nuclear facility of the Iranians. It's under a mountain, and the Israelis don't have the equipment necessary. That's a B-2 bomber and the massive ordnance penetrator, the big heavy bomb that can penetrate the fortifications. They need the American bomber and the American ordnance in order to do that. At first, the Americans were showing no inclination to get involved at all. But I think the Trump administration has seized the enormous success of the early stages of the war, and there will be voices inside the administration will say that saying, you know, why don't we just help the Israelis finish the job? Finish the job not of destroying the regime, but of destroying the nuclear program. And the argument would be that if we got involved, we could do it much more in a much more speedy fashion and in a much more surgical fashion than the Israelis can do on their own.
But Michael, then doesn't that take away any impetus for Iran not to escalate the conflict by hitting other American bases and so on? I mean, if it's going to become such an existential conflict for them where then they don't have a nuclear program and they're this close to being decapitated, why wouldn't they strategically just try and make this thing as painful as possible, particularly for Israel, which has already been fighting a war in Gaza for some time now and is, you know, I'm sure politically getting rather war weary itself?
Well, they're making it as damaging for Israel as they can, but Israel has stripped them of capabilities, and that's one of the remarkable successes